Felker, he was quite impressed with Felker. And the interesting thing was, Felker never did go off the rails again. He became a very prominent citizen of the Cariboo. In fact, the Felkers are still in that Cariboo district.
What was his reward for all this? I mean, he obviously brought justice.
Yeah, he was an interesting guy, and he did bring justice, and he was the judge of British Columbia. There's no doubt about that. And he became, of course, he became knighted, and he was knighted in 1875. And here we have a picture of a photograph of Matthew Baillie Begbie, and he's getting ready to receive his investiture. And this is 1875, which is 17 years after he came into British Columbia. So he has reached the pinnacle of his career in 1875, but not the end of it, Mike.
Apart from striking terror in the hearts of horse thieves and murderers and miscreants, did he create anything? I mean, do we owe a system of justice to him, apart from summary justice at the bench?
Well, there's no doubt that he did put his stamp on the judicial system of British Columbia, and that's open to question. But, you know, he was a circuit judge. He went all around British Columbia. He went up into the Cassiar district, up to Laketon. Man was hanged up there as well. He went into the Rock Creek area. He had his circuit judges going into the Wild Horse. He went into the Cariboo district. So he went all over, and he rode that circuit, Mike, for 33 years. He was there for a third of a century, pounding those miners' trails and bringing justice into the far-flung camps of British Columbia.
So he did make a contribution.
Oh, sure he did.
I'm going to take a break here because anybody who deals with miscreants in this fashion is obviously going to have a few enemies. We'll talk about some of his enemies right after this break. Welcome back to Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. We're addressing the man, Matthew Baillie Begbie, judge and hanging judge. Every time I go to Barkerville, you know, that's one of the things I love to do is go up to the courthouse at Richfield and hear the actors do the cases. I mean, it just puts you into that mood.
Well, let's take a look at this photograph, which is a picture of the old courthouse at Richfield. And there you can see the noose, the actual rope, and the noose is still there, and it stayed there for years, Mike. Nobody touched it, and eventually it disappeared, which is rather a shame. But a lot of his cases were held in the old courthouse in Richfield, which is just above Barkerville, just up Williams Creek. And one of the most famous cases, or perhaps infamous cases, was the so-called Grouse Creek War case. And this was a dispute over two mining companies on some very valuable ground in Williams Creek, and Matthew Baillie Begbie came down with a decision which people really did not like. In fact, the miners on the creek were absolutely livid about it, and there was almost a riot, and 500 or 600 miners were dead set on doing all sorts of things to Matthew Baillie Begbie. In fact, he is sitting up there, he's lying up there asleep one night, and he hears a commotion below him, and he hears some voices. And they're saying there are 3 or 4 miners down below his bedroom window, about 10 feet down in the hotel. And they're saying what they're going to do to Begbie. They're going to beat him up, and they're going to kill him, and they're going to ride him out of town on a rail. And he listens to this for about 2 minutes. He reaches under the bed and takes out the chamber pot, opens the window, and pours it out on top of these guys. End of the conversation, end of the threat. Great guy.
It's very straightforward for me. Get lost, you guys. That's amazing. He had enemies. Obviously, the miners were not... grudging respect after the little chamber pot issue, but other people were critical of him too.
Yeah, I think a number of people took dead aim at him. And some of these people were very powerful enemies. There's no doubt about it. Two newspaper editors, John Robson, who became eventually a premier of British Columbia, was one of, and the editor of the British Columbian newspaper in Newsminster, which was a very, very famous paper in British Columbia. And he was always taking aim at Begbie and his decisions and questioning them. And of course, Amor de Cosmos, who was the editor of The Colonist in Victoria, was also another powerful enemy. And then some other individuals like D.W. Higgins, who wrote a number of books. One was called Mystic Spring, and a number of books which were part fiction and part fact. so that he was never pinned down. And he didn't like Begbie at all.
Was this associated with his decisions and his sort of...
Begbie had an autocratic style. He would brook no interference. He didn't like people to question any of his decisions, whether they were right or wrong. And one of his chief opponents, which was kind of a strange relationship, was with a guy called John McCreight, who was considered one of the two great lawyers in British Columbia. And I think they had a grudging admiration for each other, but McCreight didn't like Begbie as much as Begbie admired McCreight. In fact, in one of Begbie makes a comment in Latin, and he says, "There goes McCreight, the conqueror of all his enemies," because McCreight very seldom lost a case. And at Begbie's death, of course, McCreight had nothing good to say about Begbie, which is rather interesting. And there were some other things which are not brought out generally, or not general knowledge, that certainly he had a very questionable deal, a land deal in a little place called Cottonwoods, which lies between Quesnel and Barkerville. And he was certainly involved in that. And there's some rumor still in the Cariboo that he had some dealings in some of the mines. And certainly I think that he may have had a silent interest in Billy Barker's original claim, because Billy Barker did get money to carry on from the province. And this is questionable, but it is open to debate, Mike. There's no doubt about it.
It certainly tainted a reputation. Even the rumor tainted the reputation.
Yeah, I think so. I think it did, and I think that he had other flaws. They say that he had a kind of a long-standing affair with a woman called Louisa Bloom. And Louisa Bloom was a very good-looking French woman who came into Victoria in the 1860s, and he knew both her and her husband, who was a haberdasher in Victoria. And the husband died, I think, about 1870, and he continued to see her, even on trips to Paris. And there is some evidence that he was perhaps blackmailed by her, because he was
not married, though.
No, he wasn't married. No.
So this was just in violation of society's requirements, and
yeah,
so
I
she
think
had a hand.
And he was a very prominent member of society. She didn't belong in that category in Victoria, and he eventually left her a bequest of $15,000, which was a considerable sum of money at his death, in 1894.
So these components contribute to sort of what would you not say he had not a clean record. He had enough conflicts with people so that these components were brought.
I think there's some questionable parts of his character, of course, and I think David Williams would probably disagree with me. But he did have other very, very strong points too. He was the creator of the old one of the original organizers of the Union Club in Victoria in 1879. It still stands. He was a very prominent tennis player in Victoria, and was invited to every social gathering that mattered, of course.
This is a shot of him with the great gray beard, actually.
That's right. Old-looking man there, probably taken about 1891.
Did he affect that look? Because you could not ask for a better, somber, steely-eyed look than this.
That's right. He probably did. And he did, as I say, brook no interference at all from anyone. And there were lawyers who simply wouldn't appear before him and had simply resigned because they wouldn't appear before him. And this is by 1894. He dies in 1894. And here's the funeral procession with Matthew Baillie Begbie's body in the hearse.
Remarkable story. I mean, classically trained, comes to the frontier, enacts his form of justice, sets up the province, maintains British interest, hangs a few people. Remarkable story.
Yeah.
Thank you. Matthew Baillie Begbie, the hanging judge, has been our story today, and thank you for watching. My thanks to Bill Barlee, and we'll see you again next time on Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Bye-bye.